Today on the Life Science Success Podcast, my guest is Yash Sabharwal. Yash is the CEO of CherryCircle Software. He's passionate about bringing novel software solutions to the life science industry to accelerate novel therapies to patients with lower development costs. At CherryCircle Software, the team has defined a new category of software for product quality and lifecycle management to facilitate digital maturity in pharma and biotech manufacturing. Welcome, Yash.
Hi, Don. Thanks for having me on the call today.
Yeah, no problem. So can you tell listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a, life science entrepreneur, I guess I would say. I've been doing this since I graduated from my PhD program at the University of Arizona. And, prior to starting this company, CherryCircle, I was co-founder at Xeris Pharmaceuticals, and I was the chief operating officer there for 6 years. And, it was my first foray into pharma, very interesting experience, great company, and sort of came across this challenge of having to manage process and development in a small company where we're going really fast and didn't have a lot of resources and generating a ton of information and just having to stick it all into Microsoft Office applications seemed like not the best way to do this. So when I left Xeris in 2016, started this company to basically help the industry by giving them a much better software solution to really manage and track their information, ultimately use it in a way that'll be helpful for them.
Yeah. So with that in mind, and so you start CherryCircle, and with that, you created a program called QBD Vision. So can you tell us about both?
Yeah. So QBD Vision it's a cloud-based platform. It's not a traditional quality management system or project management system. It was very much tailored to pharma and biotech, and a lot of the compliance requirements that they have with the GMP 21 CFR 11, and then all of the ICH guidelines that are out there. There's a lot of, if you read all of those, there's a lot of sort of rules that you're supposed to be following, and sort of ways in which you're supposed to be doing things, best practices, and so forth. And because there's never been a software solution that really coordinates all of those activities and all that information, people end up just doing it ad hoc, right? I have to do a risk assessment, so I go over here and I do it in Excel, and I have to, write a control strategy, and I go over do it here, and I write a process description over here, and none of this information actually comes together in any way that's coherent and linked. And so you end up, repeating a lot of work, spending a lot of time looking for things, trying to figure out why somebody did something a year after it was done. And so, having a structured platform like we've developed, which takes you away from that document-centric model and, says, look, just define all your requirements and then do your risk assessments and bring your data in and run your analytics and use that as a feedback loop, into your decisions around risk and so forth. And then, we're going to start making stuff. So define all those components in here as well, and let that all roll up together to then define your control strategies. That's a much more logical and rational way to do things. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with the QBD Vision platform.
I would imagine it would help with like those early audits and things like that as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would help with audits. It would help with your regulatory submissions, preparing those. So you're preparing an IND application and you need to give some, discussion around what your manufacturing process is for, what did you do when you made your materials for your preclinical studies, right? And how is that going to be different for your clinical studies? Being able to just export all that information automatically and get that into your submissions would save a ton of time and certainly help you, prepare, I think, higher quality submissions to the regulatory agencies.
Yeah. So what do your QBD Vision customers normally look like? I mean, are they newer in the marketplace? Do you have, folks that are more established? What does it look like?
Well, it's funny you ask that because a lot of people ask us this question, and what I say is that, well, when I was totally wrong from when I started. I thought logically that it would be small companies that are getting started. They're just getting a program started. They're looking at this and going, we don't really know anything about compliance and quality by design, any of these things. So we should probably use a tool like yours as a template, right? And it turned out that we've sort of had the wildly different experience. While some companies have come in like that, we've got really big pharma companies that are using our platform. They're using it for much later stage programs. So they're saying, oh, we have all this legacy data for this project and we need to get it in here so we can see where our gaps are, right? We have other companies saying, well, we've got to do a tech transfer and we've got to do it really fast. And there's no way we can do it with documents. So let's try using QBD Vision for that. And so it has run the gamut in a way that I didn't expect. So we've got, commercial production, we got phase 3, phase 2, all the way back to, starting their clinical programs. And it speaks, I think, to the power of the platform and how flexible it is and how it can evolve with your needs.
Yeah, it is really interesting because one of the things that I keep learning in this space is that almost people have to experience kind of what it's like without something or without, the right level of structure
Right.
first, and then they feel that pain, and then it's almost like, there's got to be a better way, and so then they start seeking out other solutions. Because I think I was in a similar phase, at least whenever I initially started out, that, I thought I could start with companies that were extremely small. And then, you soon find out that, they're almost too small to have, any of the problems that I can normally help them out with. And then
Right.
later on, by the time they have the problems, unfortunately, it means going backwards before going forward. So I guess as your solution gets implemented, what does that normally look like?
Well, the first thing is the most obvious thing, and that's people just want to get all their information into one place, right? I mean, for some companies or for many companies, it's almost a struggle just to figure out, hey, I have this development report. Where should I put it so that I know I can find it a year from now? Right. And so really the very first value proposition of QBD Vision is, it's one place where we can start to put all our information. So at least we know where to go look for it when it's time, right? And it's because it's structured and it's organized. You can find it very easily as well too. So people talk a lot about fair data, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, all these new kind of concepts around digital data. QBD Vision fits in really nicely with that. So it starts with, okay, let's get it all structured, centralized, right? Now we know, okay, there's one source of truth for CMC information, and then we go from there, right? So once they've done that, then they say, okay, now let's start doing some of the risk assessment work that we need to do. We can do it right within the software, so we don't have to have a separate scenario for that. And then, they start bringing in their actual manufacturing data. So it just builds layer by layer by layer, and they start to see, all that value. And, our most recent release, which really brought digital tech transfer to the solution, has been really well received, because that's a pain point that anybody who's been in pharma long enough knows how challenging and difficult tech transfer is. And so anything that can help with that is really, people get really excited about that. So that's the progression, of the value.
Very good. And I noticed that your educational background is more in optics and things. So how did you make that transition from, kind of the physics area of optics to now biotechnology? What led you here?
Yeah, that's also a question I get quite a bit. I loved being an optical engineer, and all my training was in the life sciences space around optics. So I did all my graduate work in medical imaging and biomedical imaging. And my first company actually was one I started with 2 other graduate students that I graduated with. We kind of bootstrapped this company to make high-end digital imaging systems for biomedical and medical applications. And it was a very interesting experience to bootstrap a company, but we were young and we didn't have families or anything, so we didn't have anything to lose. We could work out of the garage and sleep on our futons and such. but we worked pretty hard, and we were lucky, and were able to sell that company after a good 8-year run. But afterwards, I think I felt like I wanted to do something different. I'd been in the optics world at that point for almost 16 years, and just felt like I wanted to do something different. And I wanted to stay in life sciences. And it was one of these random events where a gentleman called me. He was the CEO of Xeris at the time. He had been connected to me through another person I knew from the optics world. And he was interested in having me join because of my experience with sort of starting a company when there was nothing there, all the work you have to do operationally to kind of get something going.
Right.
And so I said, look, I don't know anything about pharma. I could help you with the getting the company part started. And he said, that's great. And so I decided to join that team, and helped with a lot of the fundraising, a lot of the operational stuff in the beginning, and then slowly worked more into the actual technical operations side of the space and what we were doing, and learned a lot. And that's where kind of came across this pain that then helped, and then sort of launched me into this trajectory with my third startup.
Yeah. And so when you first started out, let's say whenever you went to college, did you know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur and that's why you went to college? Or did you just kind of, get closer and closer to being an entrepreneur because of different things that you did in your past?
No, I think I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just kind of had that itch always. Even when I was in high school and then early college, I did software consulting. I had my own little business to write D-based programs and other kind of sort of software programs for people. And so I've always kind of had that itch. And I went into optics because I like engineering. And then ultimately went to graduate school because I felt that having going through that process of getting a PhD and doing sort of leading edge research would expose me to opportunities that I could then there's an opportunity to take a technology and commercialize it because it's there's a real world application for it or something like that. So that's why I went to the PhD, because I wasn't going to go down the academic route. So yeah, I think I always kind of knew I wanted to do that, and find a couple of friends who were of similar thinking, and we even kind of designed our graduate studies to work on things that could ultimately be of commercial value. So we might be able to spin one of those things out into a company and go from there.
Yeah, it was interesting. I took, I know as a part of my MBA, I took one of the classes I took was in entrepreneurship, and helped build a business after that. But could never. I stayed in the corporate life for a long time, and then just recently started doing this, and I find it almost liberating in some sense, but also there's a lot always to do. So there's the work seems to never stop.
That is true.
With that, I mean, I guess the question I have for you is, how do you find that balance? How do you make sure that you're what is it? I've heard people say that you're working, on the business, not in the business.
Right? Yeah. So, I mean, with my first company, I had no balance. All I did was I worked like 80 hours, 100 hours a week, right? Because I didn't know what I was doing. So I just kept working, hoping that something would happen, right? And then with Xeris, I had a little bit better sense having gone through it the first time. But because I was in a new industry, I just, again, was, learning a lot. So I was spending a lot of time just learning the business and learning the industry too. I think now, having been through 2 startups, there's always, way more to do than there is time. And so what you learn is to just always ask yourself the question every day, out of all these things, what's going to drive the most value for the business today, right? And so for me, a lot of times it's, look, business development, generating revenue. We're not a biotech company that's trying to get through regulatory milestones. We're a software company that's trying to sell a product that should generate revenue. So that's always the marker of value when you're getting started and when you're trying to raise money, is like, how's your revenue growth? So I always try to focus on those things that will drive the value. And then, it's hard because sometimes you don't feel like, I don't feel like sending a bunch of emails today or getting on the phone or doing a bunch of demos. I just want to go do this for a while. And then you just go do that to refresh a little bit. But that's how you have to make those decisions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I recently, so there are a couple of people that I think that have developed some really nice sort of thoughts around this, this concept of just staying focused on the big things that do move your business forward instead of the small things that might not necessarily, make a big difference. Right. And,
Right.
so Gino Wickman is the guy who developed the entrepreneur operating system. He's got a really nice sort of structure around that, as well as there's a little bit of the same kind of thinking in blitz scaling by Reid Hoffman. So these guys have really come up with some nice concepts, but I still think this real world experience, not academic experience in terms of how do you apply that then to your business is important, and hearing how you've dealt with that is key. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you recognize too. I don't know if there's a classic book out there called "Crossing the Chasm," right? And
Sure.
and it's the book everybody needs to read if they're bringing a technology to market that is actually very different, right? And so, I sort of point to that book a lot, and I say, look, our adoption curve is going to look very much like this technology adoption curve from this book. I mean, we're starting with the innovators and the early adopters. They're the ones that are very forward thinking. They're the ones that are saying, look, we need to do it a different way. I'm not going to do it the old way anymore. And we're going to use QBD Vision to do that. And, this is where we are. And then we start moving into the early majority and so on and so forth. So, it's some of those approaches are tried and true. And, that's kind of where we are with following some of those approaches.
Very important book indeed. And so as you're crossing the chasm, COVID hits, and what was COVID like for you and your team last year? I mean, how did it impact the software industry?
Well, a couple of things. One is that in terms of our company specifically, we are already a sort of globally virtual company. So we didn't have a nucleus with an office and these kind of things. I've got all my people are all over the place, and we've got these great developers in Greece and Egypt and Brazil, and my CTOs in Cincinnati and my COs in Rochester. So we were already virtual, so it didn't impact us that way. We had to kind of figure out how we were going to work differently. But what it did impact was our momentum. We kicked off the year very strong, with a lot of our pilot customers from 2019 starting to convert into formal contracts. And then, March and April hit, and all of our customers were scrambling to figure out what they were going to do as well, right? So can't get into the lab to run experiments, can't get materials to make batches, can't do anything, right? And so everybody just, of course, put us on hold. And like, well, we can't, do anything with you guys till we figure out what we're going to do. That lasted about 2 to 3 months. And then I think as people kind of started to get into their new pattern of working, they started to realize that, we need different tools to work in this new way as well, right? So it wasn't just, okay, this helps us with how we were doing things before. This helps us with that, but it also helps us with the new way that we're working, where we can't get in a room together and go through spreadsheets to make decisions. We can't, I can't walk down the hall and ask somebody, hey, what's going on with this study, right? So what's with this data? I mean, so it changed people's perspective on collaboration, on institutionalizing knowledge in some sort of place where you can get access to it, even if you can't get into the office. And so that's, I think, where we saw the other surprise, which was big pharma coming to talk to us faster than we expected. Again, we always thought big pharma would say, well, we've got our systems, we've got our processes, we kind of know what we're doing, we don't need your solution. And it ended up being the opposite, where they came to us and said, oh yeah, we can't, if we have to respond like this again, we need to have a better system in place, better tools, better information. And so that's driving a lot of big pharma digital initiatives, and that's driving their conversations with us as well. So.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, it's so just as an aside to that, overall, I would imagine that your platform in many ways for a company, let's say that, now all of a sudden you're having to develop a new COVID treatment or something like that, it probably helps accelerate that because it, puts all of the regulatory information in the right place.
Yeah, it does. And, where there's an even bigger impact is in things like tech transfer, right? So there was a, McKinsey paper that came out last year that said, we won't be able to beat COVID-19 unless we can change how we do tech transfer, because we'll never catch up, right? We'll make a bunch of vaccines and there'll be a bunch of variants that we have to make boosters or whatever. And then, but if you can't make it fast enough, you don't catch up, right? So that was a very salient point. And, earlier this year, we had one of our customers come to us and say, we need to take our technical transfer time down from, months to weeks. Right. And because we have to make this very quickly. Right. And so, that's a massive compression of time, right, from what people are normally doing. And that's an opportunity for us to really showcase how our approach can make really help a company get that kind of compression and go a lot faster. And so it's a really exciting project. And that's where we really see, I think, opportunities for real transformation is in that kind of activity.
Good. And then aside from COVID, so what are some of the biggest challenges for a company like Cherry Hill?
Well, it's
Circle, excuse me.
That's okay. It's okay. The change management piece is always going to be the challenge, right? You're coming out with a solution that people understand sort of theoretically and sort of more big picture what you're doing. But, in terms of day to day, how does that fit into their current business processes, right? That is something that they have to figure out. And actually what ends up happening sometimes is that people start to implement our solution and then they see the gaps in their own business processes and they go, well, we have some work to do to kind of really align these two. So, it's more of a journey with our customers, right? It's not a, here you go, have fun and, let us know if you need something. It's a lot of it is actually sitting down and working with our customers to help them, really integrate the solution in a way that makes it more embedded and makes it more, sticky, if you will. So, getting that change management going is always going to be the challenge, but it always is for solutions that are sort of really different that way, right? When they're not incremental, it's always that challenge.
Yeah, it's funny. I've oftentimes with process improvement, I mean, one of the things that I've oftentimes used as an analogy is the picture of an iceberg, right? So when you see that, sort of little piece sticking out of the top, this is the thing that I've got to go fix. It's easy to point to that thing. But the minute that we start lowering the water level, it's not like this thing gets smaller, it gets bigger. The base is actually, much bigger, and we'll uncover a lot more kind of through that process. So,
and, one of the ways we also try to handle that is, I think this is where just getting started is important, right? So, I think if when we work with groups to just say, look, we can sit around and we can think about this for a long time, right? And we can certainly point to all the difficulty you're going to have to do this or this or this or this, right? Or we can just get started. And so there are some companies that are kind of adopting that agile mentality, right? Let's get started. Let's just iterate frequently and keep getting better, right? And those folks are actually making great use of the platform and really seeing results, I think, in a way that's different than if you try to plan it all out and get tons of stakeholders all trying to hold hands. It just doesn't work very well ultimately, and leads to a lot of inertia. So that sort of agile R&D mindset is starting to show up now, I think, and it's really helpful for us when we work with those folks.
I think I've heard that analogy before. When was the best time to plant a tree 100 years ago? You didn't plant a tree 100 years ago. Let's plant one today.
Right.
Good thing to get it going. So, I mean, it sounds the same for you. What about, the next year? What does that look like for the company?
I think we will continue to see. I mean, already in the first 6 months, we've seen a lot of expansion with our existing customers as they've been using it, as they found value, as these small groups that first got started show their peers what they're doing and the data they're getting out of it or the reports. It's sort of like, well, I want access to that new toy too, right? How do I get that, right? And so you're seeing some of that excitement build within the organizations as they use it. And so that's leading to growth within our existing customer base. And then, I think we're going to continue to see growth with more companies jumping on, and especially big pharma companies who are all trying to figure out how do we not just get better at making the stuff once it's a commercial product and tracking it, but how do we get better at developing and getting to that point more quickly. So going further upstream with the digital work, as soon as possible, I think is something that we expect will continue to happen as well. There's always going to be a bit of uncertainty around what happens with the COVID situation, right? We're, seeing accelerations again around the world. And, one of the challenges for us is that, getting in front of the customer at trade shows and conferences has been a great way for us to really have good dialogue with the customers and learn what their pain points are. And we're hopeful that there'll be, those shows will continue this fall, but it's unclear at this point what's going to happen. So we may be back in virtual mode again, but hopefully not. So.
Yeah, I've started to see things get scheduled into next year, but I haven't seen anything for this year. Probably the same for you. So there are 3 questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
2 things. One, my team. One of the things that's been different for me this go around with this startup is that it's the first opportunity that I had to kind of just handpick my own team, and so we do have a phenomenal team of people, both at the executive level and our developers and everybody. They're just good people that work hard and really want to make an impact. And I think this COVID situation has helped a lot of the team recognize that what they're working on isn't all that sort of esoteric. It's actually quite tangible, and if it can help companies get vaccines and other medicines out faster, that certainly has an impact on people's daily lives. So I think they appreciate that, and that certainly inspires them. So that's inspirational to me, and also just seeing seeing the light go on in customers' heads when they finally get it, what we're doing, and see the value. When that light goes on in their eyes, or that's very inspiring as well too, because they're like, okay, now we really understand what you're doing, and we want this, So, yeah.
And what concerns you?
I think, there's a lot of chaos out there right now, right? Chaos around supply chains and who's doing what, and a lot of consolidation in the space around contract manufacturing. And now companies just saying, well, we're going to build our own manufacturing facility now because we just can't deal with all this consolidation and lack of control. And so, the chaos is there's a lot of chaos out there right now, more so than normal. And you just never know what that can do sometimes. So, as a smaller company, you're always a little bit vulnerable to things like that. We're not that concerned about, another company kind of coming in and building the same thing we've built. I think that one of the things that we've also recognized in this journey is that there's a reason why this kind of solution hasn't been built before. And that's because it's actually not that easy to do. It's easy theoretically to say, oh yeah, you just have something that does risk and manages your requirements and so forth. But when you really get into the details of how people use it and how they do their work and all the different ways in which people do work, all the flexibility that your solution has to accommodate, then you realize, yeah, this is not an easy thing to build. And I think our team has done a phenomenal job. So that's not something we're concerned about, but just the general chaos and the back and forth of lockdowns and not lockdowns and, virtual and not virtual. It can be draining at times.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, one of the things I know we've touched on before in previous shows is just, so it'll be interesting to see what life with COVID is, as well as, life without COVID, if we can ever get to that point,
Right. Right.
as well. And I've certainly talked to epidemiologists that have said, hey, look, the future is not all that bleak. It's, we find a way through this. It's just a matter of how.
Right.
So, yeah. And what excites you?
Well, what excites us is the idea that our solution can ultimately be deployed to get products to market faster. I think, just anecdotally talking to various consultants and other people who are very experienced in just how products get developed and get commercialized and get approved for, sale ultimately, they'll all tell you that a lot of time gets wasted in sort of this, because of this lack of information coherence, right, within an organization. And of course, the unfortunate thing is that, when that's leading to delays to market, that's ultimately affecting patients, right? And so I think, the thing that excites me the most is being able to hopefully look back on this experience one day and say, well, we did something that actually made a difference. And it's the same sort of sense I get when I think back to my early days at Xeris. We were developing an EpiPen style injectable drug for severe hypoglycemia to replace the standard kits you have to reconstitute right now, And, I look back on that now and say, well, that's an approved product. It's out there now. People are using it, and they're basically getting glucagon on board to patients a lot faster without having to call them, EMS or whatever, and saving lives. And I think that's great, so I think that result is ultimately going to be a thing that's exciting to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, having the ability to impact so many products and so much product development would be phenomenal as well. Does sound exciting.
Yes.
So Yash Sabharwal, thank you so much for coming and sharing the story of CherryCircle and everything that you're doing there. And thanks so much for spending time with me today.
Yep, absolutely. Have a great day. And we look forward to talking to you again at some point in the future.
Thanks so much.
Take care.